Rain tore through the night like 1,000 whispering knives. Lydia Gray's hands shook as she pressed her satchel to her chest, the soaked fabric of her dress clinging to her legs. The storm howled with the kind of fury that seemed personal, as if the heavens themselves had chosen to punish her for surviving the day. She had been dismissed, without pay, without mercy. The lady of the house had called her insolent, unfit, and ungrateful, because Lydia had dared to protect a servant child from the cruel hands of his master's son. Now she was alone on the road between Whitby and Hawthorne, her boots sinking in mud, her lantern extinguished by the storm. Lightning split the sky. For a heartbeat the world turned white, and she saw it. A carriage overturned, wheels jutting at odd angles, horses screaming in panic. Her breath caught. Dear God! She ran. Mud splashed against her hem as she reached the wreck. Two small voices were crying from inside the carriage. Lydia dropped her satchel and threw herself against the door, fighting the weight of twisted wood and iron. "Hold on! I'm coming!" she shouted. The door gave way with a groan. Inside she found two children, a boy and a girl, both no older than 8. The girl's face was streaked with tears, the boy's lip trembled, blood trickling from his brow. "It's all right," Lydia whispered, gathering them both close. "You're safe now." A low, commanding voice broke through the storm. "Step away from them." Lydia froze. A man stood a few paces away, tall, broad-shouldered, a dark cloak clinging to his frame. His eyes gleamed even in the storm's fury, sharp and unyielding. She swallowed. They were trapped. "I know." His tone softened, though the power beneath it lingered. "And you've done well." He strode forward and lifted the carriage with strength that startled her. The driver stumbled up, dazed, and began to calm the horses. "Take the children to the manor," the man ordered. Manor. The word struck Lydia like a bell. This was no ordinary traveler. I can help," she said. He turned to her fully now, the wind catching his cloak and revealing a silver crest embroidered near his collar. A falcon over crossed keys. The Hawthorne crest. Her breath hitched. "You're Edward Hawthorne," he said simply. "The Duke of Hawthorne." The storm seemed to quiet around them for a moment. They reached Hawthorne Manor near midnight. The great doors opened with the creak of age, revealing flickering candlelight and the hush of servants moving in practiced silence. "Get the children dry," the Duke said, handing his soaked coat to the butler. "Send for Dr. Pembroke." Then, with a faint nod toward Lydia, "And see that the young woman is given a warm fire and something to eat." She tried to speak, to thank him perhaps, but he was already turning away, his expression unreadable, his stride as precise as a blade's edge. Hours later, Lydia sat by the hearth in a small sitting room, her hair loose around her shoulders, steam rising faintly from the hem of her skirt. The manor was quieter now. Only the faint tick of a distant clock kept her company. She watched the flames dance and let her mind wander to the dismissal, the storm, and the strange turn of fate that had led her to this house. Her satchel lay on the rug beside her chair. She reached for it, checking to ensure her few possessions remained, a worn Bible, 2 letters of reference, and the sealed envelope she had carried for nearly a year. The envelope was faded now, edges softened by travel and time, but the seal remained unbroken, a falcon over crossed keys, the same crest she had just seen on the Duke's cloak. Her hand trembled. It couldn't be coincidence. Before she could think further, a shadow fell across the doorway. "You're awake." The Duke stood there, his hair still damp, his white shirt open at the collar. Even in simple dress, authority clung to him. I wanted to thank you, Your Grace," Lydia said, rising quickly, "for the shelter, and for your kindness." He studied her for a moment, his gaze steady, searching. "You were brave tonight. Most would have fled. I've seen storms before." That drew the faintest hint of a smile to his lips. Brief, but real. Have you? I grew up near the moors, she said quietly. Storms teach you to hold on to what matters and let go of what doesn't. His eyes flickered. Something passed across them then, too swift to name. Regret, perhaps. Memory. He stepped closer to the fire, the light painting his face in shades of gold and shadow. My children are asleep. The physician says they'll recover quickly. For that I owe you. You owe me nothing, Your Grace. Then allow me to disagree, he murmured. We pay debts in Hawthorne Manor. Before she could reply, a soft clink drew his attention. The envelope had slipped from her satchel and fallen to the floor. He bent, picked it up, then froze. The seal stared back at him, wax cracked but still clear. His eyes lifted to hers, sharper now, dangerous. Where did you get this? Lydia hesitated. It was given to me years ago. I was told to deliver it if ever I came across the name Hawthorne. His grip on the envelope tightened. By whom? A woman, she said. My mother. The air between them shifted. Something in his face changed, so subtly she almost missed it. He turned the envelope over once more, then handed it back without another word. You should rest, he said, voice quieter now. There's a room prepared for you upstairs. My housekeeper will show you the way. Lydia took the envelope, tucking it close to her chest. Thank you, Your Grace. He nodded, but his eyes lingered on her longer than propriety allowed. When she was gone, he moved to the fire, staring into its restless glow. The flames reflected in his eyes like the ghosts of memory. Then softly, to no one in particular, he said, Her mother was never meant to come back to this house. Outside, the storm began to fade, but in Hawthorne Manor, something far more dangerous had just been awakened. Lydia woke to a scream, not her own, a child's. High, terrified, echoing through the stone corridors like a blade-slicing silence. She was on her feet before her mind caught up, her nightdress clinging to her as she threw open the door and ran. The manor was dim, the lamps guttering low. She followed the sound, up one staircase, down another corridor, until she found the door to the nursery flung wide. Inside, the little girl she'd rescued, pale and trembling, sat upright in bed, eyes fixed on something unseen. Rosamond, Lydia whispered, crossing the room. It's all right, sweetheart. You're safe. The child didn't answer. Lydia sat beside her, gathering her small hands in her own. Was it a dream? The girl's lips moved. A faint sound, almost a breath. Mama. The word struck Lydia still. From the doorway came a deeper voice, raw with disbelief. She spoke. The Duke stood there, shirt unbuttoned at the throat, hair disheveled, eyes wide. His presence filled the room like the sudden weight of thunder. Lydia nodded. She did. He crossed the space in 2 strides, kneeling beside the bed. His hand trembled slightly as he brushed his daughter's hair back. Rosie, what did you say, my darling? But the girl had already gone quiet again, gaze distant, her lips pressed tight. Lydia met his eyes, for the first time truly. There was more than shock there. There was pain so deep it could swallow a man whole. She spoke your name, Lydia said softly. She's trying to come back to you. He looked away, jaw tightening. Children say strange things when frightened. It doesn't mean... She said, Mama, Your Grace. Lydia interrupted, her tone gentle but firm. She remembers, or dreams. Either way, it means something. The Duke's eyes darkened. He rose abruptly. See that she rests. I'll send for Mrs. Pembroke. Then he turned and left, his footsteps hard and quick against the floorboards. Lydia held Rosamond's hand until the girl's breathing evened out, her tiny body relaxing back into the pillows. When the child finally slept again, Lydia looked toward the window, toward the black sky bruised with the fading storm, and whispered to herself, What ghosts live in this house? By morning, the manor had returned to its usual quiet rhythm, though something unseen pulsed beneath it. A hush of tension, of secrets half buried and stirring. Lydia found her way to the breakfast room, guided by the faint scent of coffee and toasted bread. Servants moved silently about, offering polite nods. She was about to take her seat when a familiar voice broke through the air. "I'm told my children owe their lives to you," said the Duke, stepping into the light. He looked composed again, waistcoat fitted, cravat perfect, but the shadows under his eyes betrayed a night without rest. Lydia rose slightly. "I only did what anyone would have done." "Then it's fortunate not everyone is as you are." He motioned for her to sit. "Eat. You'll need your strength." She hesitated. "Your Grace, if you wish me to leave today, I'll understand. The roads should be clear by noon." His brow furrowed. "Leave? You misunderstand. I intend to offer you employment." Her heart faltered. "Employment? As governess to my children." She stared. "But I'm no noblewoman, Your Grace. Surely you have candidates of higher standing." "Standing has little to do with it," he said curtly. "My daughter has not spoken in 2 years until last night." His gaze locked onto hers. "That was no coincidence. You brought something into this house that has been missing for far too long." Warmth rose to her cheeks, followed quickly by unease. "I'm honored by your offer truly, but you don't know me." He gave a faint, humorless smile. "I've spent my life surrounded by liars and flatterers, Mrs. Gray. I know honesty when I see it, mostly because it's so rare." Something in his tone made her chest tighten. "All I ask," he continued, "is that you remain until Christmas. 3 months. You'll have quarters near the nursery, full access to the music room, and freedom to teach as you see fit." Her hand brushed against her satchel where the sealed letter still rested inside. Her mother's final gift. Her final lie, perhaps. And now, of all places, she had walked straight into the home it bore the mark of. Lydia forced a breath. "Very well, Your Grace. Until Christmas." The days that followed unfolded quietly, the manor revealing itself piece by piece, long corridors lined with faded portraits, sunlight slanting through dust-heavy windows, the faint sound of a piano that hadn't been touched in years. The children, Rosamond and Henry, clung to her at first with wary silence. But little by little their fear softened. Lydia began with simple games, humming scales, playing soft tunes, coaxing smiles where there had been none. It was on the 3rd afternoon that Rosamond reached out a tiny hand and pressed a single key on the piano. Lydia smiled. "That's E." The girl's eyes lifted to hers. "E for everything," Lydia said. "For all the songs waiting to be found." The child smiled back. Across the room, unseen by either of them, the Duke stood by the doorway, motionless, listening. He had meant to pass by. Instead, he stayed. Every note Lydia played seemed to fill the empty space between them, him and his daughter, grief and silence, the ache of what had been lost. He didn't speak to Lydia much after that, but she began to feel his presence in small ways. A fresh vase of winter roses in the schoolroom, new sheet music appearing without explanation, a quiet glance during supper that lingered a heartbeat too long. Yet beneath it all was something else, tension, quiet but sharp, like a bow drawn across strings too tightly wound. Because Lydia carried a secret, one the Duke could never know. Her late husband, Charles Gray, had once been Edward Hawthorne's closest friend, until betrayal had turned them to enemies. And the letter in her satchel? It had been Charles's final request before his death. Deliver this to Hawthorne when the time is right. She didn't know what it contained, only that it frightened her. That night, unable to sleep, Lydia wandered the gallery hall. The portraits stared down at her, generations of Hawthornes with proud eyes and unsmiling mouths. Her candlelight caught one frame, a woman in ivory silk, seated beside a piano. Her expression was gentle, almost sad. Beneath the painting, a plaque read, Lady Eleanor Hawthorne, Duchess of Hawthorne, 1782-1818. The late Duchess, the mother Rosamond still dreamed of. Beautiful, isn't she? Came a voice from the shadows. Lydia turned sharply. The Duke stood there, hands clasped behind his back, his expression unreadable. She was, he said, stepping closer, in every way that mattered. I'm sorry, Lydia murmured. Your daughter still dreams of her. He gave a hollow laugh. So do I. Only mine aren't kind. The silence that followed was heavy, threaded with ghosts. She died here? Lydia asked softly. In this very hall, he replied. A fever took her. Quick, merciless. He glanced toward the portrait. Since that night, Rosamond hasn't spoken. Henry barely remembers her. Lydia's throat tightened. That kind of silence isn't forgetfulness. It's love, turned inward. His gaze snapped to hers, raw and piercing. And what would you know of love, Mrs. Gray? Her breath caught. I knew enough to lose it. Something flickered across his face. Regret, perhaps. He looked away first. I've been discourteous, he said finally. Forgive me. There's nothing to forgive. He turned to leave, but paused. You remind me of her, you know. Lydia's heart stilled. Of the Duchess? In ways I can't yet name. He looked back once, eyes shadowed. Good night, Mrs. Gray. Long after he left, Lydia stood beneath the painted eyes of the dead Duchess, the candle trembling in her hand. You and I, she whispered, seem to haunt the same man. She turned to go, and froze. At the end of the corridor, a small figure stood, half hidden in the dark. Rosamond. The child held something in her hands. A small music box, its lid open, the faint melody of a lullaby drifting through the air. Lydia knelt. Where did you find that, darling? The girl's eyes lifted, solemn and clear. Mama's room. Lydia's blood went cold. You went there? She wanted you to have it. The words hit Lydia like a hammer. Who wanted me to? Rosamond's gaze didn't waver. Mama. The wind outside rose again, sighing against the glass panes. Lydia looked at the girl, at the music box, and at the portrait behind her. Then faintly from somewhere deep within the manor, far beyond sight, a single piano note rang out. One note clear and deliberate, and then another, and another. The melody was the same one the child's box played. Lydia gathered Rosamond into her arms and whispered, It's only the wind. But she didn't believe it. Neither did Rosamond, because even the wind didn't play in tune. The carriage wheel snapped clean off the moment Lydia's heart did. The jolt threw her sideways, her satchel tumbling to the floor as the horses reared. She gasped, clutching the seat as the coachman shouted above the storm, rain slicing in through the cracked window pane. The journey to Wexley Hall had barely begun, and already the world seemed determined to test her resolve. Mrs. Gray, are you unharmed? The coachman called. I'm quite all right, she shouted back, though her voice trembled. Her fingers brushed the satchel, still sealed, the wax unbroken. The Duke's crest glimmered faintly in the candlelight, red and ominous as a wound. Because of that letter, she was returning to the house tied to her husband's death. Because of that crest, she could no longer pretend the past was something she could simply outwalk. The storm howled again, and the coach lurched forward as the wheel was hastily mended. Through the downpour, she could just make out the jagged silhouette of Wexley Hall looming in the distance, its towers like fingers scraping the low, angry clouds. By the time she arrived, night had swallowed the estate whole. The great iron gates creaked open, their hinges wailing like ghosts. She stepped out, her boots sinking into mud, rain soaking through her cloak. A butler with a lantern hurried forward, bowing stiffly. Mrs. Gray, I presume. His Grace awaits you in the drawing room. Of course he did. Inside, warmth and silence fought a losing battle against the storm outside. The flicker of the fire painted everything in restless shadows. Tall mirrors, gilded frames, the hollow eyes of forgotten ancestors. When the Duke entered, he looked like he'd been carved from that very darkness. "Mrs. Gray," he said, "you made it through the storm." "I seem to have a habit of surviving storms, Your Grace." He studied her for a long moment. There was something in his gaze, an echo of memory, or maybe guilt. "My daughter has been waiting for you." "She's awake at this hour?" "She doesn't sleep easily," he replied. "Not since—" He stopped himself, the rest caught in the shadows between them. "She's in the music room. Go to her. She's curious about you." The music room was as beautiful as it was tragic. Heavy drapes of crimson velvet, a chandelier that had lost half its crystals, and in the center a grand piano, its keys yellowed by time, its silence loud enough to ache. Lydia paused at the doorway. The child sat before the instrument, her small hands resting on her lap. The faint light of the fire kissed her curls, and when she turned her face, Lydia saw her eyes, large, watchful, and far too old for her years. "Hello," Lydia said softly. "You must be Isabella." The girl didn't answer, only tilted her head slightly, as though the sound of Lydia's voice were a melody she couldn't quite recall. Lydia knelt beside her. "Your father tells me you used to play." Silence. Lydia smiled faintly. "I don't suppose this old piano remembers what that feels like. Shall we remind it?" Still no reply, only a faint tightening of the child's small jaw, a twitch of her fingers, hope or fear, Lydia couldn't tell. She sat, pressing one key gently. A low, resonant note rolled through the air. "It's E," she said. "The same note the dawn sings if you listen closely enough." The girl blinked, something flickering behind her stillness. Lydia pressed another key, and another, softly building until the notes began to weave a lullaby she hadn't played in years. The same one her husband had written for her before their marriage. A tune of promises they never kept. The melody trembled in the air like fragile glass. Isabella shifted closer, one hand creeping toward the keys. Then, hesitation. "It's all right," Lydia whispered. "Play with me." The child struck a single note. Then another, the smallest, most uncertain duet in the world. From the doorway, a sharp intake of breath. Lydia looked up. The Duke stood there, frozen. For a heartbeat, he said nothing. "Then, that song," he said hoarsely. "Where did you learn it?" Lydia blinked. "It's an old piece. My husband composed it." His face went still, too still. "What was your husband's name?" She hesitated, the answer catching in her throat. "Charles Gray." The Duke's expression changed, something dark and flickering like a candle fighting the wind. "I see." He stepped forward, every movement measured. "That melody was the last thing my brother played before he died." Lydia's breath hitched. "Your brother?" "Yes," he said quietly. "The night before the duel." A chill crawled down her spine. She gripped the edge of the piano to steady herself. "I didn't know. I imagine you didn't." The air between them turned sharp, electric. Lydia rose slowly. "Your Grace, I assure you I had no part." He cut her off with a wave of his hand. "It's late. Take the blue chamber near the nursery. Mrs. Pembroke will see to your needs." And just like that, the wall came up. Cold, impeccable, impenetrable. That night, Lydia couldn't sleep. The melody kept looping in her mind, tangled with the Duke's words, with his silence. She rose and lit her candle, moving to the small writing desk where her satchel lay. The sealed letter gleamed faintly in the dark. Its wax crest cracked just slightly from years of wear. She ran her thumb over it, whispering into the stillness. "Charles, what did you do?" A soft knock startled her. She opened the door to find Isabella standing there in her nightdress, clutching the music box from before. "Sweetheart," Lydia said gently, It's past midnight. The girl held out the box. It stopped playing. Lydia smiled faintly, kneeling to take it. Maybe it just needs winding. She turned the key once, twice, then froze. Inside, under the mechanism, something glinted. She pried it open and found a folded scrap of parchment, yellowed and delicate. She unfolded it with trembling hands. The handwriting was unmistakable. Forgive me, Alexander. The duel was not my will. The truth lies with your kin. Her husband's signature followed. Lydia's heart slammed against her ribs. The Duke's brother had died in a duel. Her husband had been blamed. But this note changed everything. She looked down at Isabella, whose small face was solemn. Did your mother keep this? The girl nodded. Mama said one day it would make the music stop hurting. Lydia swallowed hard, tears stinging her eyes. Then she was a wise woman. The girl looked up. Will you tell Papa? Lydia hesitated. Not yet, my love. Not until I understand it all. She tucked the paper back into the music box, sealing it shut. Then she took Isabella's hand. Come, let's take you back to bed. As they walked down the hall, a gust of wind rattled the windows. The candle flickered violently, and for just a moment Lydia thought she heard it again. Soft, low, faint as a memory. A piano playing itself somewhere in the dark. The next morning, the Duke found her in the garden. Mrs. Gray, he called, his tone clipped, I owe you an apology for last night. She turned, blinking against the pale sunlight. An apology is not necessary, Your Grace. We both have ghosts. He studied her closely. My brother's death was a wound that never healed. The name Gray reopened it. You could not have known. She nodded slowly. Grief makes strangers of us all. His lips twitched, a ghost of a smile, perhaps. And yet somehow you've made my daughter smile again. That is no small miracle. It isn't a miracle, she said softly. It's music. He looked at her then, really looked, and something unspoken passed between them. Something fragile and forbidden. Then perhaps, he murmured, you might teach me too. Her breath caught. To play? To remember, he said. For a moment she saw not the Duke, but the man beneath, the weary father, the grieving brother, the soul starving for something he'd long forgotten. Peace. She wanted to say yes, to tell him that music could make even broken hearts beat in harmony again. But before she could speak, a voice called from behind them. Your Grace! Lady Celia Harcourt approached, her gown a shimmer of frost-blue silk, her smile thin as glass. Forgive my intrusion, she said, curtsying. I've come to call on my dear niece and nephew, and to meet their new governess. Lydia inclined her head. Mrs. Gray, at your service. Celia's gaze swept over her like a blade. A pleasure, I'm sure. Alexander's tone hardened. Celia, you are welcome here, but mind your words. Oh, of course, she said sweetly. I only wish to ensure the children are in good hands. Her eyes lingered on Lydia's plain dress, her unadorned hands, the faint mud on her hem. After all, we must be careful who we let influence impressionable minds. Lydia met her gaze evenly. Children see truth far clearer than adults, my lady. That's why they seldom need to pretend. Celia's smile faltered. How charming. Alexander's eyes glinted, almost amused. Mrs. Gray has a point. Celia's gaze flicked between them, suspicion sharpening. Well, she said at last, her voice silken with false warmth. I suppose time will tell whether she brings harmony or discord to this house. And as she swept away toward the manor, Lydia exhaled softly, the air leaving her lungs like a prayer. Because Lady Celia Harcourt, with her perfect poise and icy charm, looked every bit the type of woman who could make music turn to silence again. And Lydia Gray had no intention of being silenced ever again. The piano slammed shut with a thunderous crack. Lydia's trembling hands hovered above the keys as the Duke's voice cut through the room, sharp, low, and dangerous. "You lied to me." His words were not shouted, but they carried the weight of a sentence. The echo of it filled every inch of the music room, wrapping around the silence like a noose. Lydia stood frozen. The candles flickered wildly as if even the flames were frightened to breathe. He stepped closer, his boots striking the marble like verdicts. In his hand, crumpled and creased, was the letter. The one she'd hidden in her drawer. The one she'd prayed he'd never find. "Your husband," he hissed, "was Henry Gray. The same Henry Gray who challenged my father's honor, ruined my family's name, and died with my curse on his tongue." Her throat burned as she whispered, "Yes. And you came into my house," he said, voice cracking on the edge of fury. "You touched my daughter, sat at my piano, and let me—" He stopped himself, looking away, as if the rest of that sentence could break them both. Lydia took a breath, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "I didn't come here to deceive you. I came because I needed to live again. Because your daughter, your sweet, silent child, needed someone who could understand silence." He turned, eyes blazing, grief and betrayal mingling like storm clouds. "And what of me, Lydia? What did I need? A ghost to walk through my halls and undo what little peace I had left." Tears burned behind her eyes, but she didn't cry. "You needed to hear music again," she said softly. "You just didn't know it yet." For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. The Duke's hand trembled. The letter slipped from his grasp, fluttering to the floor like a wounded bird. Then, as if his anger had burned itself out, he turned away and whispered, "Leave Wexley Hall. Tonight." Lydia's breath hitched. "Please, don't send me away. Not before the recital. She's almost ready. She will play without you." His tone cut through her plea. She must. The door slammed. The sound echoed in her chest long after he was gone. The night was endless. Rain fell like grief itself, soft at first, then violent, beating against the tall windows of her small room. Lydia sat at the edge of her bed, a candle trembling beside her, the letter spread open on her lap. Henry's handwriting stared back at her. "If you ever find yourself at Wexley again, do not speak my name." She let out a hollow laugh. "You were always selfish, Henry," she murmured. "Even in death, you still command me." A knock startled her, small, gentle. "Come in," she said, wiping her eyes quickly. The door creaked open. Little Clara stood there in her nightdress, her curls tangled, her tiny hands clutching the stuffed rabbit Lydia had sewn for her. "Miss Lydia," she whispered, voice trembling. It was the first time the child had spoken in 3 years. Lydia's heart stopped. "Clara, what did you say?" Clara blinked up at her, lips quivering. "Don't go." Lydia fell to her knees, arms wrapping around the child in an instant. Tears spilled freely, hot and unstoppable. "Oh, my darling girl, you spoke." The little one clung tighter. "Papa's sad," she said, voice breaking. "You make him less sad." Lydia buried her face in Clara's hair, sobbing quietly. "I wish that were true, love." But deep inside, something shifted. Hope, fragile but alive, began to flicker again. Morning came, gray and brittle. Lydia packed her small suitcase in silence. The hall outside was empty, but she could feel the house listening, holding its breath. As she stepped out into the corridor, she saw him at the far end. The Duke, standing in the half-light, eyes hollow from a sleepless night. Neither spoke. He watched as she walked toward him, the weight of 1,000 unsaid words between them. When she reached him, Lydia stopped and said softly, "Your daughter spoke." His head jerked slightly. "What?" "She came to me last night," she said. "Don't go." Lydia met his eyes. She found her voice through music. Through me. His expression cracked, pain warring with disbelief. "You're lying." I would never lie about that, she said, her voice trembling but steady. You wanted her healed. She is. And now you would cast away the one thing that gave her courage. He took a step closer, eyes glinting like the edge of a blade. Do you know what it costs me to look at you? Every time I see you, I see him. The man who destroyed my father. The reason I buried half my family's honor in the ground. Lydia met his fury with quiet defiance. And yet you kept listening to me play. That silenced him. She held his gaze. Because music doesn't care about blood or vengeance. It listens, it forgives. You should too. His jaw tightened, but the fight in his eyes faltered. Without another word, she turned and walked down the grand staircase. At the bottom, Clara was waiting, still in her nightgown, clutching her rabbit. Don't go, she whispered again, voice louder this time. The Duke froze halfway down the stairs. The sound of his daughter's voice, soft, real and alive, filled the silence like sunlight breaking through rain. He stepped forward slowly, eyes wide. Clara? She nodded, tears shining on her cheeks. Papa, please. Lydia's hands trembled. She looked at him, at the man torn open by a child's miracle. He sank to his knees and gathered Clara into his arms, choking back a sound that was half laughter, half sob. My little bird. Clara turned, still clinging to him. Miss Lydia can't leave, she said. He looked up, and for the first time since she'd known him, the Duke's eyes were wet. I don't know if I can forgive what's past, he said. Lydia swallowed hard. Then don't, she whispered. Just start over. That evening, the rain cleared. The halls of Wexley glowed again with warmth, with the hum of quiet life. Lydia sat at the piano one last time, her fingers trembling as she played the opening notes of Clara's recital piece. The Duke stood at the doorway, watching silently. Clara sat beside Lydia, small hands poised on the keys. Together they played, a duet of hope, forgiveness, and everything that words could not carry. The final chord rang out, sweet and trembling. When the last note faded, the Duke crossed the room. You should stay, he said quietly. Lydia looked up. As your daughter's tutor? He hesitated. As her teacher, yes, but also as something more. If you can forgive me for being a fool. Lydia smiled faintly, tears glistening in her eyes. You weren't a fool, she said. Just a man who needed to listen. He reached out, fingertips brushing hers. And you made me hear again. Their hands met atop the piano keys. One last note trembled beneath their touch, soft, unspoken, and true. Outside, the garden filled with the sound of new rain, but inside Wexley Hall, for the first time in years, everything was finally still. The firelight caught the tears on her face. Lydia stood before the Duke, the music room dark around them except for the trembling orange glow that painted her trembling hands. You cannot ask me to stay and then build a wall between us, she said, voice breaking. Not after all that's been torn down. The Duke said nothing. His jaw was tight, his eyes shadowed. He'd been staring into the fire for nearly an hour, unmoving. The letter from the Earl of Pembroke, her late husband's brother, lay open on the piano. The ink still glistened wet under the candlelight. He finally spoke, voice low and steady. Do you know what he demands, Lydia? She swallowed hard. I read it. He wants money. Silence. To drag your name through scandal if he doesn't get it. The Duke nodded slowly. He's threatening my daughter's future. Her breath hitched. And mine. He looked up sharply. Yours? Henry left debts in my name, she said quietly. The Earl knows this. If he exposes me, I lose my position. Everything. You'll be accused of harboring me. The whispers will destroy us both. For a moment, neither spoke. The fire cracked, and the silence between them deepened. Then he stepped closer. Then we give him nothing, he said, voice like iron. No silence, no payment. Let him speak. Let the world know. Lydia's voice trembled. And let your daughter grow up in the shadow of scandal? Let Wexley be dragged through the mud again? He stopped, his resolve faltering for the first time. The pain in his eyes was that of a man who had already buried too much. She turned away, clutching the back of the chair for balance. You promised peace for her. You can't fight every ghost, William. The sound of his name on her lips cracked something open in him. He crossed the distance between them, taking her hand. His thumb brushed the back of it, gentle, reverent, aching. Then what would you have me do? He asked, voice barely more than a whisper. Watch you leave again? Pretend I don't see you in every room of this house? She shook her head, blinking back tears. You have to let me go for Clara's sake. I've already lost too much, he said, his voice breaking. Don't ask me to lose you too. The words hung there, raw and unguarded. She closed her eyes, the tears finally falling. Then don't make me stay as your secret. Morning came cold and unforgiving. The letter was gone. The Duke had sent his carriage at dawn. Lydia sat by the window, wrapped in her shawl, watching as the servants loaded trunks into the coach. She felt hollow, too tired to fight, too proud to plead. A soft knock at her door drew her back. Clara peeked in, still in her nightdress, her curls wild from sleep. Papa says you're going, she whispered. Lydia knelt before her. I have to, my darling. But you mustn't worry, you'll still play, you'll still make music. Clara's lip quivered. You'll write to me? Lydia smiled sadly. Every day if you promise to practice. The child nodded, tears welling. She pressed something small into Lydia's hand, a ribbon, blue and faded. For luck. Lydia held her close, breathing in the scent of lavender and innocence. You are the bravest girl I know, Clara Wexley. Never stop singing, even when the world is quiet. As she stood, she saw him at the doorway. The Duke. His eyes found hers, and for a long moment, the world seemed too still. No words, no farewell, only the quiet ache of everything they couldn't say. Then she turned and left. Days turned to weeks. Lydia took rooms above a small bookshop in Bath, giving piano lessons to merchant daughters and lonely widows. The music was softer now, emptier somehow. At night, she would play alone, the melody of Clara's recital echoing through the dim room. And every so often she would look toward the door, half expecting him to walk through it. He never did, until one storm-torn evening. The shop bell rang long after closing. Lydia looked up, startled. The door swung open, rain sweeping in behind a tall, dark figure. The Duke, soaked through, hair plastered to his forehead, eyes wild, not with anger, but desperation. He shut the door behind him. I thought I could forget you, he said hoarsely. I thought I could bury it all again. But I hear your music even when there's no piano. I see you in every silence. Lydia's breath caught. You shouldn't be here. If the papers be damned. He stepped closer, each word trembling with restrained force. Pembroke sent his letter. I burned it. Let him speak his poison. I will not live by another man's shame again. She stared at him, torn between disbelief and the fierce, aching hope rising in her chest. Why would you risk everything? Because I already did when I let you go. The words struck her like a physical blow. He took another step, voice softer now. You once said music forgives, that it listens. So listen to me, Lydia. I am not my father's grief, or your husband's ghost. I am just a man who wants to live again, and I can only do that with you. Her tears came hot and fast. And what of Clara? What of her future? He smiled faintly, brokenly. She asks for you every morning. She's playing again. She even sings now. She says she wants you to come home. Lydia covered her mouth, a sob escaping. He reached into his coat and pulled out something small, a blue ribbon, frayed at the edges. Clara's ribbon. "She sent me with this," he said. "Said you'd know what it meant." Lydia's hand trembled as she took it. "Luck?" she whispered. "No," he said gently. "Love." The word undid her. She crossed the room before she could think, her hand finding his cheek, rain cold beneath her palm. He leaned into her touch like a man starved. "I've been half alive without you," he murmured. "Come back to Wexley, not as a servant, as what you are, to me." Lydia's breath hitched. "And what am I to you, William?" He met her gaze, the answer in his eyes long before he spoke it. "Everything." The journey back to Wexley Hall was quiet. The rain had ceased, leaving the countryside washed and gleaming under a pale sunrise. When they arrived, Clara ran from the steps before the carriage even stopped, her laughter ringing through the air. "Miss Lydia." Lydia stepped down, catching the child mid-run, spinning her in her arms as tears streamed down both their faces. "Oh, my little songbird," she whispered, kissing her hair. "You kept your promise." The Duke stood a few paces away, watching them with a look of quiet awe. Later that evening, as the candles flickered low and the last light faded from the windows, Lydia sat at the piano once more. This time she didn't play alone. Clara sat beside her, fingers finding the notes of a new melody, one soft and trembling, but full of life. The Duke stood behind them, his hand resting lightly on Lydia's shoulder. As the final chord faded into silence, he leaned close and whispered, "You've brought music back to this house, Lydia Gray. And to me." She smiled, eyes glistening. "No, William. You just remembered how to listen." The clock struck 9. Outside, the night wind rustled through the roses in the garden, the same garden that had once known only silence. Now, it carried the sound of laughter, of forgiveness, of love reborn. And when the Duke bent to kiss her, the world finally, blessedly, went still. Rain hammered against the grand windows of Wexley Hall, turning the world beyond into a blur of gray and sorrow. Lydia's sobs were silent, too deep for sound, as she stood in the music room one last time. Her trembling fingers hovered above the piano keys that had once felt like home. Now, they felt like betrayal. The Duke's voice echoed behind her, raw and jagged. "You should have told me the truth." She didn't turn. Her reflection in the polished black of the piano lid looked like a ghost, pale, hollow, broken. "Would it have changed anything?" "It would have changed everything," he said, every word a blade. "Or perhaps nothing," she whispered. "Because the moment you learned my name, I saw it in your eyes. Henry Gray's widow. That was all you needed to know." He moved closer, rainwater dripping from his boots, his breath sharp with fury and heartbreak. "You carry his locket, Lydia, his face pressed against your heart while you stood here, teaching my daughter, playing her mother's piano." She finally looked up, her tears glistening. "Do you think I meant for any of this? I didn't know. I didn't know he was your brother's—" "Don't say it!" he thundered, voice cracking. "Don't you dare speak his name as though you mourn him." The room seemed to shake with the force of it. The candles flickered, one by one extinguishing, as a gust of wind slipped through the cracked window. Lydia's breath shuddered. "I've mourned enough men to fill a graveyard. My husband, my freedom, my peace. You—" Her voice broke. "You were supposed to be the one I didn't lose." The silence that followed was unbearable. The Duke's hand clenched at his side, his knuckles white, jaw rigid. Finally, he said, low and dangerous, "Leave Wexley Hall by morning." Her knees nearly buckled. "William." He turned away before the sound of his name could soften him. "Do not make this harder." Her tears fell freely now, hot and helpless. "You think you're protecting your daughter, but you're just teaching her that love dies the moment it becomes inconvenient." He froze, but didn't turn back, not even when she whispered, "Goodbye, Your Grace." The door closed softly behind her, leaving only the piano and the storm. By dawn, Lydia was gone. The house seemed to dim in her absence. The air, once humming with music, lay heavy and stale. Clara, the Duke's daughter, sat at the breakfast table in silence, her spoon untouched. "Eat, darling," William murmured, trying to sound composed. Clara didn't move. Her tiny fingers clutched the edge of her dress. "Where is Miss Lydia?" The words sliced him open. She had to go away. Why? He hesitated, throat tight. Because sometimes grown-ups make mistakes. Clara looked up, eyes wide and wet. Was it me? Did I do something wrong? That broke him completely. He sank to one knee beside her, taking her small hands in his. "No, my love. You did everything right." "Then why are you sad?" she whispered. He couldn't answer. He pressed his forehead to hers, swallowing the pain like poison. By the end of that week, the piano remained untouched. Dust began to settle on its surface, dulling its shine. The corridors of Wexley Hall grew quieter, the servants' voices hushed. Even the gardens outside seemed less alive, as though mourning too. Every night, William poured himself another glass of brandy and stared into the fire, waiting for the music that would never play again. Lydia's journey back to Bath was cruel in its stillness. The rain had stopped, but the roads were thick with mud, and every turn of the wheels felt like a heartbeat she no longer wanted to hear. When she arrived, her landlady, Mrs. Everett, met her with a pitying smile. "Oh dear, you look half drowned. Come, I'll put the kettle on." Lydia managed a faint nod. "Thank you." She unpacked her trunk in silence, setting the blue ribbon Clara had given her on the windowsill. Then she took out the locket, the cursed thing that had unraveled everything, and placed it in a drawer. That night she played the piano in the small parlor downstairs. The notes were fragile, barely holding together. The melody, Clara's lullaby, shattered midway through, and Lydia Gray, once the quiet strength of Wexley Hall, broke apart on the keys. Back at Wexley, storms gave way to bleak winter. Celia Harcourt arrived unannounced one afternoon, sweeping into the drawing room in her finest mourning silk, though her husband had been dead for over 2 years. She curtsied with false sweetness. "My dear William, you look positively dreadful." He ignored her. "What do you want, Celia?" She tisked softly. "A concerned sister-in-law can't visit without suspicion." "You're never concerned without cause," he muttered. Her eyes flicked toward the silent piano. "Ah, so the governess is gone. I had wondered how long that farce would last." He glared at her. "Mind your tongue." "Oh, William," she sighed, feigning innocence. "You think you were the first man she charmed? I warned you from the start. Women like her, widows of scandal, cling to wealth and pity like ivy to stone." His hands tightened on the back of the chair. "That woman healed my child when no physician could." "And broke your reputation while she was at it," Celia replied coldly. "Do you know what people whisper now? That the Duke of Wexley hides his mistress under his roof." His face hardened, voice trembling. "Enough." She tilted her head. "You should be grateful I'm the one telling you. The world is crueler. You'd do well to choose your company wisely next time." She turned to leave, but paused at the door. "And William, don't make the mistake of believing love excuses poor judgment. It never does." When she was gone, he exhaled shakily, staring at the dying fire. Poor judgment. Perhaps she was right. Yet as he rose and crossed to the piano, his hand brushed the lid, and a sharp ache pierced his chest. Lydia's perfume still lingered faintly in the air, lavender and lemon oil. He lifted the lid, hesitated, then pressed a single key. The note rang hollow, out of tune, just like his heart. Days blurred. The snow thickened. Then one morning Clara entered the music room on her own. The Duke found her there, small and fragile against the vast piano. Her tiny hands hovered over the keys. "I can't remember how to play," she whispered. He knelt beside her. "You don't have to, my love." She shook her head fiercely. "Miss Lydia said I mustn't stop. That songs die when you stop playing them." Tears filled his eyes before he could stop them. "She said that?" Clara nodded. "Will she come back, Papa?" He swallowed hard. "I don't know." She pressed one key, then another. The sound was wrong, stiff and awkward. But she tried again, slowly, gently. It was the lullaby. Broken, halting, but real. William's breath caught. His vision blurred. He hadn't realized he was weeping until Clara reached up and wiped a tear from his cheek. "Don't cry, Papa," she said softly. "Miss Lydia wouldn't want you to." He gathered her in his arms, holding her close as she whispered, "You should go find her." The words echoed in his mind long after she'd gone to bed. By morning, he'd made his choice. Bath greeted him with gray skies and the smell of wet cobblestone. He found the small music school easily enough, the same one Lydia had once written to him about. But when he entered, he froze. She was there, standing before a group of children, her fingers guiding theirs across the keys, her voice calm and kind. She looked thinner, paler, yet more alive than he remembered. When she noticed him, her words faltered. The children glanced between them curiously. "Continue your scales," she managed, forcing a smile. Then softly to him, "Wait outside." He obeyed. When she finally emerged, the air between them was taut, fragile. "You shouldn't have come," she said. He looked at her, weary but resolute. "I had to." "For what? Another accusation? Or to tell me your sister-in-law's latest rumor?" His voice softened. "To tell you the truth." She blinked, thrown. "The truth?" He nodded, removing a folded paper from his coat. "A letter. From Pembroke," he confessed. "The duel wasn't over dishonor. It was over debt. Your husband was defending my brother's name, not tarnishing it." Her lips parted. "No. That can't be." He handed her the paper. He begged forgiveness before taking his own life last week. Lydia's breath hitched. The words on the page blurred through tears. William's voice trembled. "All these years I hated a man who died protecting my family, and I punished you for it." She closed her eyes, silent tears streaking down her face. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I was wrong," he whispered, "and I can't live with that unless you know." Her hand shook as she lowered the letter. "You could have sent a messenger." "I tried," he said, his voice cracking. "But every letter I wrote felt empty. I needed you to see me, to know I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for a chance to make it right." She looked at him then, really looked. The man she'd loved, stripped of pride and title. Just a father, just a man. "William." He took a step closer, eyes glistening. "Come home, Lydia." Her heart pounded. "And if I can't?" He smiled faintly. "Then I'll wait outside your door every day until you can." Her laugh broke through her tears. "You wouldn't dare." "Try me." A pause. Soft, fragile, beautiful. Then without another word she stepped forward and rested her head against his chest. He held her as though she were air itself. They returned to Wexley by moonlight. The household awoke to whispers the next morning. The governess was back, no longer as servant, but as mistress of Wexley Hall. Clara flung herself into Lydia's arms with a squeal of delight. "I knew you'd come back." Lydia smiled through tears. "You kept playing, didn't you?" Clara nodded proudly. "I made up my own song." "Then you must teach me," Lydia said. The Duke watched from the doorway, his heart finally still. That evening, he gathered the household in the music room. "Wexley Hall has known too much silence," he said. "From this day forward, it will know music again." And as Lydia played, her fingers light, sure, and filled with love, He looked at her and saw not the shadow of loss, but the beginning of everything he never thought he'd find again. Outside, the rain began once more, but this time it sounded like applause. And within Wexley Hall, the silence was gone forever. The storm had returned. It battered the windows of Wexley Manor as if determined to drag the past back inside. Lydia stood in the drawing room, hands trembling over the piano keys, the ghost of a melody trembling beneath her fingertips. Behind her, the Duke's voice broke through the thunder, low, raw, dangerous. "You lied to me." Lydia froze. He stood in the doorway, rain in his hair, eyes burning with betrayal, and something worse. Hurt. The letter lay crumpled in his fist, the seal she'd prayed he'd never see broken. "Wexford," she whispered, but the name died on her lips. "Lydia Gray," he spat her name like a curse. "Or should I call you Lydia Harcourt, the wife of my rival, the woman whose husband tried to ruin me?" Her chest constricted. "Please let me explain." "There is nothing to explain." His voice thundered louder than the storm. "You came into my home under false pretenses. You sat at my piano, held my daughter's hand, smiled at me, knowing exactly who I was." She rose, shaking. "I came here to teach music, not reopen graves." He stepped closer, fury radiating. "You came here to cleanse your guilt." Her eyes filled. "Guilt?" "Yes. For the man you married. For the lies he spread. For the debt he left me to carry when his schemes collapsed." His breath came harsh. "You should have told me, Lydia." She trembled, clutching the edge of the piano as if it could hold her together. "If I had, you'd have never let me near you. Or her. And I couldn't." Her voice cracked. "I couldn't walk away from her silence, not when I saw it in her eyes. The same silence I've lived with since my husband died." He turned away sharply, his hands shaking. "You had no right." "I had no choice," she said quietly. He closed his eyes, jaw tight. "You should go. Tonight." The words hit harder than the thunder that split the sky. Lydia's knees nearly buckled. "You don't mean that." "I do." He didn't look back. "Before the dawn." She wanted to scream, to throw the truth at him, that love had crept in where grief once lived, but his back was already retreating into the shadows. When the door shut behind him, the echo of it was worse than silence. It was final. Hours passed. Lydia packed what little she owned, her movements hollow, mechanical. The house was still, save for the storm and the occasional creak of the old walls, like the manor itself was mourning. She paused by the child's room. The door was ajar. Soft sobs drifted through. "Amelia?" she whispered. The little girl sat curled on her bed, clutching the tiny wooden music box Lydia had given her. Tears streaked her cheeks. "He said you're leaving," Amelia said, her small voice trembling. Lydia knelt, her heart cracking at the sight. "I have to, sweetheart. It's complicated." The girl shook her head fiercely. "No, you promised." Lydia's throat burned. "I know, and if I could stay, I would." Amelia's tiny fingers gripped hers. "Please don't go." The words shattered what strength she had left. Lydia pulled her into her arms, holding her close, rocking her as if time itself might bend to mercy. "I love you, Amelia," she whispered against her hair. "Don't ever forget that." The child sniffled. "Then take me with you." Lydia closed her eyes, tears spilling freely now. "If only I could." Downstairs, the Duke stood by the fire, the unopened decanter of brandy untouched beside him. The stormlight flickered over his face, half shadow, half anguish. Every part of him screamed that he'd done the right thing. She'd deceived him. She'd entered his life under false pretenses, stirred emotions he'd long buried, made him hope again. And yet, the image of her at the piano wouldn't leave him. The way her hands trembled on the keys, the way Amelia's laughter had filled the room for the first time in years. He pressed a hand to his chest, as though he could crush the ache there. Damn it, he muttered, and slammed the decanter down so hard the glass cracked. Your Grace? He turned. Mrs. Greaves, the housekeeper, stood in the doorway, her nightrobe drawn tight. What is it? He snapped. It's Miss Gray. She's leaving. His jaw clenched. I ordered it. Yes, but Amelia is with her. He froze. She's run after her, Mrs. Greaves said, voice trembling. The carriage driver just found the front doors open. He didn't wait another word. The wind howled through the courtyard. Lydia stood by the waiting carriage, clutching her cloak around her as the rain drenched her hair. Miss Gray, the driver called over the storm. We must leave now if we're to make it to the village before dawn. She nodded numbly. Then, Lydia. Her heart stopped. Amelia came running from the manor steps, barefoot, nightdress soaked through, her small figure a blur in the rain. Amelia, Lydia cried, rushing forward. What are you doing? You'll catch your death. The girl collided into her arms, shaking, sobbing. Don't go. Lydia tried to steady her, to pry her off gently. Sweetheart, listen to me. I have to. No! A shout cut through the downpour. Amelia! The Duke was running toward them, his coat whipping behind him, his voice full of fury and fear. He reached them in seconds, grabbing his daughter into his arms, pressing her tight against his chest. What were you thinking? His voice cracked, half a sob. You could have been hurt. Amelia clung to him. She can't go, Papa, please. He looked up at Lydia, rain streaking both their faces, the distance between them filled with everything unsaid. Go back inside, he murmured to his daughter. No. Amelia's voice broke again. Not until you make her stay. Lydia turned away, pain twisting in her chest. Don't, please, this isn't... Quiet, the Duke said softly, his eyes never leaving Lydia. Inside, Amelia. The little girl hesitated, then finally obeyed, trudging back toward the warm glow of the manor. The Duke stood there in the rain, his chest rising and falling, every muscle in him taut. You were leaving, he said flatly. You told me to. He laughed bitterly. And you obeyed, just like that. What else could I do? Fight, he said. You could have fought for me. Her breath caught. And what would I have said, Wexford? That I love you? That every note I played was a prayer you'd look at me again? His expression faltered, just for a heartbeat. I never meant to deceive you, she whispered. But if I'd told you who I was, you'd have hated me before I had the chance to prove otherwise. You should have trusted me. You gave me no reason to. The silence that followed was unbearable, charged with pain and longing and everything they could not undo. Finally, he said, Go. She nodded, her lip trembling. Goodbye, Your Grace. But when she turned to step into the carriage, his voice came again, softer, breaking. Lydia. She stopped. He took a slow step forward, rain dripping from his hair, eyes searching hers. Tell me one thing before you go. She swallowed hard. What? Did you ever love him? Her heart nearly stopped. My husband? He nodded. She looked at him for a long time, the rain blurring her tears. No, she said quietly. Not the way I love you. The air between them fractured. He took another step forward, and another, until she could feel the warmth of him despite the storm. Then, without warning, he kissed her, hard, desperate, like a man drowning. Her hands found his coat, clutching him back, all the pain and longing of the past weeks unraveling between them. When they finally broke apart, she was breathless. You're a fool, he whispered. Then we're both damned, she said. Lightning tore across the sky, illuminating them in its glow. For a heartbeat, they stood suspended between ruin and redemption. Then he whispered, Come home. And she did. Morning came soft and golden, as if the storm had been nothing but a fevered dream. Lydia sat at the piano again, fingers tracing the keys, her hair loose around her shoulders. Amelia sat beside her, humming softly, a sound more precious than any melody. From the doorway, the Duke watched them, his heart unguarded for once. Lydia looked up and met his eyes, and this time neither of them looked away. The scream tore through the corridor, high, desperate, and unmistakably Amelia's. Lydia dropped the porcelain cup in her hand. It shattered across the floor, forgotten, as she sprinted from the parlor, her skirts tangled around her legs, her heart pounding against her ribs. "Amelia!" she shouted, the name raw in her throat. The child's voice came again, thinner this time. "Papa!" Lydia rounded the corner and froze. At the base of the grand staircase, the Duke was kneeling, his arm locked protectively around Amelia. The front doors were flung wide open, rain spilling in from the storm outside, and at the threshold stood a man Lydia never thought she'd see again. Thomas Harcourt, her dead husband's brother, the ghost of a past she'd buried. "Good evening, Lady Harcourt," he said, his smile sharp as broken glass. "Or should I call you by your new name, Miss Gray?" Lydia's breath caught. "Thomas." The Duke rose slowly, positioning himself between them. "You know this man?" She could barely speak. "He's my brother-in-law." Thomas chuckled. "Brother-in-law, a convenient title for a woman who vanished with half my brother's estate after his death." "That's a lie," she hissed. The Duke's eyes narrowed, shifting between them. "Explain. Now." Thomas stepped forward, water dripping from his hat, his gaze cold and triumphant. "My late brother was many things, a fool, a dreamer, but he adored her. And when he died, his fortune was gone. Every creditor whispered her name, and every trail of debt ended with her signature. I wonder, Your Grace, do you know where she found the funds to run this little escape?" Lydia's pulse thundered. "Don't listen to him. He's twisting everything." "Am I?" Thomas tilted his head. "Or did you use your dead husband's secrets to worm your way into another Duke's favor?" The Duke's jaw flexed. "You will mind your tongue in my house?" Thomas smiled. "Oh, I intend to. I only came to collect what's mine. Lydia and I share unfinished business." Lydia's hands trembled. "You'll leave this place now, Thomas." He took a deliberate step closer. "Not before I tell His Grace what really happened the night your husband died." The Duke's eyes darkened. "Enough." Thomas's grin widened. "Oh, I don't think so. See, Lydia's husband didn't just fall ill and die quietly in his sleep. He confronted her that night, over letters she'd sent to you." He looked at Wexford, eyes glinting. Letters she swore were never answered. The air in the room changed, thick, suffocating. Lydia staggered back. "He's lying." "Am I?" Thomas's tone softened to mockery. "You kept them, didn't you? The Duke's letters, the ones you wrote before your marriage, the ones you swore were burned." Wexford turned to her, confusion and hurt twisting his face. "What letters?" She shook her head violently. "It doesn't matter. They were years ago, before I married, before everything." "Everything?" Thomas barked a laugh. "Before you destroyed my brother's life chasing a man who didn't want you." "Stop!" Lydia's voice broke. The Duke's silence was worse than anger. She turned to him desperately. "Please, listen to me. I was young, foolish. I never meant—" He raised a hand, quieting her. His gaze was cold. "Is it true? You wrote to me before your marriage?" Tears welled in her eyes. "Yes, but you never replied." "Because I never received them," he said, voice tight. Thomas smiled. "Because my brother intercepted them. Everyone." Lydia's chest constricted. "You?" "Yes," Thomas said softly, savoring her horror. "He read every plea, every confession. It was his greatest torment. He used them to break you. And when he finally confronted you, you fought. Didn't you?" Her hand went to her throat. "No." Wexford's voice hardened. "What are you saying?" Thomas's grin vanished. "I'm saying your beloved music tutor pushed my brother down the stairs and left him to die." The room froze. Lydia's breath came in short, panicked gasps. "That's not true. He fell. It was an accident. I tried to help him." The Duke stared at her, motionless. The storm howled outside, but inside, there was only silence. Thomas took a step forward. "You can ask the coroner, or the servants who saw her running from the house that night. Poor Widow Gray, alone and frightened, clutching the last of his ledgers." "Enough!" The Duke's voice cracked through the air like thunder. "Get out of my home before I throw you out myself." Thomas smirked. "You think you can protect her? Wait until the papers hear the story. The Duke of Wexley shelters the widow who murdered her husband." "How noble." Lydia's voice rose, shaking. "You monster. You've twisted everything for your own gain." Thomas's eyes glimmered with cruelty. "Gain? Oh no, dear Lydia. This is justice." The Duke moved suddenly, closing the distance in 2 strides. He grabbed Thomas by the collar, dragging him toward the door. "You've said enough." Thomas laughed even as rain lashed across his face. "She'll ruin you too, Wexford, just like she ruined him." The Duke shoved him out into the storm. The doors slammed shut with a sound like final judgment. Lydia stood shaking, her back pressed to the piano, her breath uneven. He turned slowly toward her. "Tell me it isn't true." "It isn't," she said hoarsely. Not the way he said it. He took a step closer. "Then tell me what happened." Her voice faltered. "That night my husband found your letters. He accused me of adultery, of loving you even then. He said he'd destroy what was left of me. I tried to leave. He stopped me. He grabbed my wrist. We struggled, and he fell. I swear to you, I didn't mean to." "Stop." His voice was soft but sharp. "You should have told me." "I was terrified," she whispered. "I thought if I told you, you'd see me as he did, as a woman who brings ruin to every man she touches." The Duke's expression cracked, pain flashing in his eyes. "You think so little of me?" "I think too much of you," she said, her voice trembling. "That's the problem." He turned away, pacing before the fire. The light threw long shadows across his face. "Every time I try to forgive you," he said quietly, "the truth finds a new way to wound me." She moved closer, unable to stop herself. "You once told me that music can make even pain beautiful. Let me prove that's true." His gaze met hers, storm-dark and desperate. "And if I can't?" "Then hate me," she said softly. "But don't stop listening." Silence stretched between them, heavy and fragile. Then from the stairwell a small voice broke through. "Papa." They turned. Amelia stood clutching her doll, her eyes wide. "Why are you shouting?" Lydia dropped to her knees. "Sweetheart, it's all right." The child looked between them. "Is he making you leave again?" Lydia's lips trembled. "No, darling, not this time." The Duke's face softened for the first time that night. He went to his daughter, kneeling before her. "Go back to bed, my love. Everything will be fine." Amelia hesitated. Then she reached for Lydia's hand and placed it in her father's. "Promise." Neither of them spoke. "Promise," the Duke finally said, his voice rough. The child nodded, satisfied, and padded back upstairs. Lydia's hand lingered in his, small and trembling. "I don't know how to fix this," he admitted. She swallowed. "Then let's start with the truth. All of it." He looked down at their joined hands. "And if the truth destroys us? Then at least we won't be living in lies." The rain had eased outside, the storm's fury spent. Inside, the fire flickered, and for the first time in a long while, warmth began to edge out the cold. Wexford exhaled shakily, his thumb brushing her knuckles. "Stay," he murmured. Her breath hitched. "You still want me here?" He nodded once, almost imperceptibly. Until I can't anymore. And though the words should have broken her, they didn't. Because beneath them, she heard something that sounded like hope. She stepped closer until her head rested against his chest, the steady beat of his heart grounding her in the moment. They stood that way for a long time, two souls carved by grief, stitched back together by something neither dared to name. Outside, dawn began to bleed across the horizon. And for the first time since the music began, the silence between them wasn't empty. It was promise. The carriage wheels screeched as the horses reared, and the Duke was thrown forward, gripping the frame as the driver fought for control. Mud splattered across his coat, the night alive with thunder. But he didn't care. He could see her, through the rain, through the fog, standing under the flickering lamplight outside the chapel, her cloak clutched tight around her. "Lydia!" he shouted, his voice raw. She turned sharply, disbelief flashing in her eyes. He was out of the carriage before it had even stopped, boots splashing into the puddled street. He moved toward her like a man chasing breath itself, the rain running down his face, the weight of everything he'd done pressing hard against his ribs. "Don't," she said as he drew near, voice trembling. "Don't come any closer." "Lydia, I can't go through it again," she cut in, shaking her head. "Every time I think I've healed, you find me and tear it all open again." He stopped a few paces from her, chest heaving. "Then let me be the one to mend it this time." She laughed, bitter and broken. "Mend it? You think an apology can sew together years of shame, of whispers, of being dragged through every lie that man told?" He took another step closer. "I don't want to fix the past. I just want you." "Wanting me ruined you once," she whispered. "It ruined me too." The wind howled through the narrow street, carrying with it the church bells from St. Mary's down the hill. "I know what Thomas said," he began, voice shaking. "But it's over. The truth." "The truth?" she repeated, lifting her gaze to his. "And what truth do you believe now?" He took a folded parchment from his coat, soaked and creased. "The truth your husband died protecting." Her breath caught. "I found the coroner's record," he said softly, "and the letter your husband wrote before the accident. He confessed to intercepting ours. Said he couldn't live with the jealousy anymore. He begged forgiveness. From both of us." Lydia's knees gave way, and she sank to the steps. Her hand covered her mouth as tears slipped free. "He loved you," Alexander continued, kneeling before her. "Twisted though it was, he thought he was saving you from me. And when he fell, he called your name." Her sob broke through the rain. "I tried to save him. I did." "I know," he said, voice breaking. "God help me, I know." They stayed like that for a long moment. The Duke, stripped of title and armor, and the woman who had haunted him for years. Finally, Lydia lifted her gaze. "Why come now, after everything?" He smiled faintly. "Because your music stopped. And when it did, I realized the silence was killing me." Something in her broke open at that. She reached for him without thinking, her fingers trembling as they brushed his cheek. "You shouldn't be here." "Maybe not," he said. "But if I'm to live another day, it will be with the truth between us." Her eyes searched his, looking for something real, something she could believe in. "Say it then," she whispered. "Say what you came to say." He took her hands in his, steady despite the storm. "I came to ask if you can forgive me, for doubting you, for letting my pride come before love, for every cruel silence I made you endure." Lydia shook her head, tears blurring her vision. "And if I can't?" He exhaled. "Then I'll walk away. But I'll still spend the rest of my life thanking you for teaching me what love sounds like." A pause. The rain softened to a whisper. "Alexander." Her voice trembled around his name, the first time she'd said it in months. He looked up at her, And for the first time, she didn't see the Duke. She saw the man, the one who had carried his daughter through grief, who had learned to breathe again in music that wasn't his own. She leaned forward until their foreheads touched. "I don't know how to forgive you," she whispered, "but I want to." He closed his eyes, relief shaking through him. "Then that's enough." When their lips met, it wasn't desperate. It was quiet, tired. The kind of kiss that only comes after two people have survived every storm that could have drowned them. When they pulled apart, he pressed the parchment into her hand. "Keep it. Let it end with us." She nodded, her tears mixing with the rain. "And Amelia?" He smiled softly. "She plays your lullaby every night. Says she won't stop until you come home." A sob escaped her. "Oh, that child. She misses her teacher," he said, a ghost of a laugh beneath his breath. "Her father does too." She met his gaze again. "What now?" He extended his hand. "Come back to Wexley Hall. Not as a tutor, as its mistress." Her breath hitched. "You'd still have me? After everything?" "I'd have you because of everything," he said simply. "Because you've known grief and didn't let it harden you. Because you make even sorrow sound like a hymn." She hesitated, the weight of the past flickering behind her eyes. Then she slipped her hand into his. "Take me home." He helped her into the carriage, the door closing with a quiet finality that sounded like peace. As they rode through the misted dawn, the first streaks of sunlight broke through the clouds. Lydia leaned her head against his shoulder, the rhythmic clatter of wheels echoing like a heartbeat. She spoke softly. "Do you ever wonder what your mother would think of all this?" He smiled faintly. "She once told me that the greatest symphonies are born from silence. I think she'd approve." By the time they reached Wexley Hall, the rain had stopped. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and rosewood. Servants gathered in quiet astonishment as their carriage rolled in. Inside, the house seemed almost to breathe again. Curtains were drawn, light spilling over marble and mahogany. In the music room, Amelia sat at the piano, small fingers tracing the keys. When she looked up and saw Lydia, she froze. "Mama?" she whispered. Lydia's eyes filled. "No, darling, it's me." Amelia ran to her, wrapping her arms tight around her waist. "I thought you'd gone forever." "Never," Lydia said, kissing the top of her head. "I just lost my way for a little while." The Duke stood behind them, silent, watching as something in the room shifted. An old sorrow lifted, replaced by warmth. "Papa," Amelia said suddenly, looking up at him. "Can she stay?" He crouched down beside them, his eyes meeting Lydia's. "She's home now," he said softly. Later that evening, music returned to Wexley Hall. Not the mournful tones of grief, but a new melody, hopeful, gentle, alive. Lydia's hands moved across the keys with purpose, the Duke standing beside her, one hand resting lightly on her shoulder. Amelia hummed along, her voice no longer a whisper but a song. Outside, the gardens bloomed wild after the rain, their reflection shimmering in the long windows. When the last note faded, Lydia turned to him. "What shall we call it?" He smiled. "The melody of Wexley Hall." She laughed softly. "Fitting." They stood in the glow of the candles, surrounded by music and memory, by forgiveness and the fragile grace of new beginnings. He took her hand once more, lifting it to his lips. "You once said music can heal wounds. Words cannot," he murmured. "And you once said silence was safer than truth," she replied. "We were both wrong." He smiled. "Then let's be wrong together." The hall echoed with laughter, theirs, Amelia's, and the faint hum of the piano still resonating through the air. As the night deepened, Lydia looked around the room that had once been haunted by loss and saw only light. The portrait of the late Duchess still hung above the mantel, but it no longer loomed like a ghost. It watched like a blessing. Amelia climbed into her father's lap, sleep heavy in her eyes. Lydia sat beside them, her head resting on his shoulder. Outside, the world was quiet again, but this silence was different. It wasn't absence, it was peace. And when the final candle flickered low, the Duke leaned close, whispering against her ear, "Every song ends, my love, but some stay playing in the heart forever." Lydia smiled, eyes glistening. "Then let this one never fade." The piano gleamed in the moonlight, the strings humming faintly in the breeze, alive at last, with every note they'd fought to find. And somewhere beyond the walls of Wexley Hall, the world listened to its melody. Soft, redemptive, eternal.